The studio audience gasped exactly on cue when my mother's voice broke. "I did my best," she said, pressing a tissue to one perfectly smudged eye. "Single motherhood it's not easy, but I would have done anything for my children." "Anything?" The host leaned forward, eyes soft, hand hovering just above my mother's knee. "You're so brave, Lorna," she murmured. "Raising 3 kids alone, launching a successful business, and now your best-selling book, Raising Lions, is inspiring parents everywhere. You are the definition of a resilient mother." The audience applauded. A few people stood. I watched it all from the dark edge of the set, fingers curled around the laminated guest badge hanging cold against my chest. The camera swung toward my mother, catching her as she lowered her eyes, shoulders shaking just enough to look cinematic. The monitor above the stage flashed her book cover, Raising Lions, How I Turned My Broken Family into a Miracle. Underneath, in smaller letters, it read, featuring exclusive letters from my estranged daughter. My letters. Stolen, edited, weaponized. "Now," the host said, smiling into camera too, "we have a surprise. Lorna, you told our producers that your greatest wish is to reconcile with your eldest daughter, the one who slipped away." My mother made a small wounded sound. "She cut us off," she whispered. "Blocked our numbers." I haven't heard her voice in 5 years, not since she ran off to punish us. It was impressive, the way she could turn the knife and make herself bleed at the same time. "Today," the host continued, "we're going to try to heal that wound. Please welcome to the stage your daughter Harper." The audience erupted. Lights swung. The floor manager gave me a subtle nudge. I stepped into the heat of the stage lights, the applause hitting my skin like static. For a moment, everything blurred. The host's smile, the band playing a soft, emotional sting, the audience craning to see whether I would run into my mother's arms like they'd been fed to expect. Mom stood slowly, one hand pressed to her chest as if her heart might leap out. "Harper," she breathed. My sneakers made almost no sound on the glossy stage floor as I crossed to the chairs. The host gestured between us. 5 years, she said, no contact. "Harper, what do you want to say to your mom?" The camera's red light glowed. The audience leaned in. Somewhere in the control room, a producer shifted his finger over the button ready to cue sentimental music. I turned to my mother and let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. Then I smiled, small and deliberate. "I want to say," I began, my voice steady under the lights, "that this is the last time you'll use my story without my consent." The host blinked. The audience murmured. My mother's smile flickered, confusion pulling at the corners. "Harper, sweetheart, we're on national television." "I know," I said. "That's why I brought these." I reached into my bag and set a thick, neatly bound stack of papers on the coffee table between us. The camera zoomed unconsciously toward it. On the top page, under the logo of a law firm my mother didn't know I could afford, 3 words sat in bold black ink: cease and desist. The audience didn't know what they were seeing yet. My mother did. Her face went white. She thought today would expose me. She had no idea it was the day the world would finally see her. I didn't grow up with a villain for a mother. I grew up with a heroine. At least that's how she told it. Lorna Hayes, the woman who worked 3 jobs, who sacrificed everything for her kids, who survived my father leaving, a recession, and a housing crisis like she'd wrestled a hurricane and won. In every story, she held the center of the storm and we were the grateful survivors. She was loud in the ways people praised. Aggressive, funny, dramatic, charismatic. People at church said things like, "I don't know how you do it, Lorna," and "Your kids are so lucky." They didn't see the other scene. The one where she stood in the kitchen at midnight, bills spread across the table like a losing hand of cards, wine staining the rim of a glass, and hissed, "If you'd all just try harder, maybe this wouldn't be so hard." Try harder meant different things for each of us. For my brother, Eli, it meant score more goals, get more scholarships, make the family look good on the soccer field. His trophies lined the living room shelves, polished weekly. For my sister, June, it meant hit the high notes, land the leads, post the right photos. Mom called her my star. Her framed headshots hung in the hallway like a gallery. For me, it meant disappear. I was the one who got "You're so mature for your age," while my hands scrubbed dishes at 11 because Mom was too exhausted. The one who translated bills into payment plans in high school, who knew the exact day the electric would be cut if we didn't send something, anything. My first memory of my mother using my pain as a prop is stupid, small. I was 9. My front tooth had chipped when I slipped on the concrete outside our apartment. There was blood, bright and metallic. I cried not just from pain but from shock. Mom took a picture. "Don't be such a baby, Harp," she laughed, though her eyes were already calculating. "This'll be hilarious once I post it." Single mom life. When your kid breaks her face and you still have to go to work. People eat that stuff up. She did post it. The likes poured in. So did the comments about strong single mothers and poor baby. She hadn't taken me to the dentist yet. As I got older, the posts changed shape but not function. My report card with straight A's became, exhausted but proud, doing it all on my own. My panic attack at 15 became, teen drama when you're already dead on your feet. Send coffee. The day I fainted from not eating because I used my lunch money to help cover a gas bill became, she's so sensitive. Pray for us, y'all. Every hard thing that happened to me became a tile in the mosaic of her heroism. She stopped talking about my father completely, like erasing him made her struggle purer. The abuse that trickled in around the edges, emotional, financial, loud, and quiet in equal measure, always pointed one direction, away from her. "Everything I do is for you," she'd say, waving a bill in one hand and a wine glass in the other. "If I tell people our story, it's to make sure we survive. Don't you want that?" Survival in her mouth always sounded like a threat. When I was 16, she started a blog. It was small at first, stories about single mom life, tips on stretching grocery budgets, funny anecdotes about my lions, as she called us. She changed our names but kept the details. Her version of me, Mara, was overly sensitive, ungrateful, always misunderstanding her saint of a mother. The blog grew, so did my quiet fury. By the time I left for college at 19, she had 10,000 followers and a modest Patreon. By the time I blocked her at 22, she had sponsors. By the time I saw her on that stage, wiping fake tears, she had a book deal, a tour, and a national audience. All built on the bones of things I never consented to share. The last time I saw her before I disappeared from her narrative, we were in our old kitchen, the linoleum floor peeling at the corners like a bad excuse. I had just come home from campus for the weekend. My backpack was still slung over one shoulder, heavy with biochem textbooks and a growing sense that my life had to be bigger than overtime shifts and survival. Mom sat at the table, laptop open, her fingers flying over the keys. A ring light cast a harsh glow over the room. She had started doing live streams by then, Wine and Wisdom with Lorna, where she answered questions about raising lions alone. "Don't come in frame," she hissed as I walked past. "I'm recording a segment about generational trauma. It'll be good for the algorithm." I stopped. "You're what?" She waved me off, eyes never leaving the screen. "Relax. I never use your real name. That's not the point." She sighed dramatically, pulled off her headphones, and turned toward me with the weighty patience of someone dealing with a difficult client. "What now, Harper?" "What now?" I repeated, putting my bag down. "You did a whole episode last week about Mara stealing money from your purse. You know I saw that, right? You made it sound like I was some manipulative brat. You didn't mention that I took $20 because Eli needed a copay and you were too hungover to drive him to urgent care." She rolled her eyes. "It's called creative framing. People don't need every boring detail." "I'm not content," I snapped. "I'm your daughter." Without missing a beat, she said, "You're both." Something cracked then, small, invisible, like a hairline fracture in a glass that doesn't shatter until much later. "I didn't give you permission," I said. She laughed. "Oh, please. Everything I share is my experience. You can't own my story, Harp. That's not how it works." "You can't own my story. The irony would be funny if it hadn't carved me open. When you told your followers I ran away at 17, I said, did you tell them why? That you kicked me out for calling you drunk on a school night? That you told me to find somewhere else to be dramatic?" Her jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do to keep this family from falling apart." "No," I said slowly. "You did what you had to do to keep the narrative from falling apart." She stood then, pushing her chair back so hard it banged the wall. "You think you're better than me because you got a scholarship," she shouted. "Because you read big books and use words like narrative? I'm the reason you're not sleeping in your car. I'm the reason you're eating. I bled for you. I get to tell my story. Any other time, I would have backed down, shrunk, apologized for being ungrateful. That night, I didn't. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Then tell it without me, I said. Because the next time you use me for clicks, I'll make sure people know the whole story. Her laugh followed me out into the cold. You don't have a platform, Harper, she called. No one cares what you think. She was right about one thing. Back then, no one did. So I left that house, that city, that version of myself, and learned how to become someone no one could edit again. Reinventing myself didn't happen in a montage. There was no upbeat song, no quick cuts of me studying under fairy lights. It was slow, grinding, often humiliating work. I took the scholarship and added 3 part-time jobs. Library assistant, night shift cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy, lab tech washing glassware until my fingers pruned. I paid my own phone bill, in my own name, with my own debit card. I checked every box on every form twice. I read privacy policies like they were thriller novels. I changed my number. Blocked her on everything, phone, email, socials. Reported her blog once when she posted a fictionalized story about an ungrateful eldest daughter who stole household money to go on a trip. The photos she used were of my childhood bedroom. My report was denied. No violation found. Because you can say almost anything if you call it a story. So I stopped trying to play defense and focused on offense. I studied media law as an elective. Sat in the back of the lecture hall scribbling notes about defamation, invasion of privacy, misappropriation of likeness, public disclosure of private facts. Words that had once lived in the mouths of lawyers and professors started to feel like tools I might one day be able to pick up. I started therapy. The first time my therapist asked, "When did you learn your feelings were content for someone else?" I laughed until I felt sick. By the time I turned 25, I was finishing a master's program in clinical psychology and working at a nonprofit that specialized in digital abuse. Revenge porn, stalking by proxy, parents posting their children's worst moments for followers. It was like staring at my life through a cracked mirror. I read intake forms from kids who wrote, "She shares everything. I don't exist unless I'm in her feed." Teens who said, "My meltdowns get the most engagement. She likes the comments." Young adults who admitted, "I'm scared to tell my mom anything because it'll end up online." Their pain wasn't hypothetical. It was familiar. One night, sitting under the humming fluorescent lights of my tiny office, I stayed late and did something I had avoided for years. I typed my mother's name into the search bar. The blog had grown into a full brand. She had a podcast now, a line of mugs with slogans like "Lion Mama" and "Sacrifice is my love language." Her Instagram bio read, "Single mom of 3 turned pain into purpose, helping you do the same." I scrolled. Photos of Eli's wedding, captioned with how hard it was to sit alone after being abandoned by her oldest. Reels of June's performances, framed as proof of her resilience despite her broken big sister. And then I saw it. A teaser post for her upcoming book. In Raising Lions, I finally tell the whole truth about my ex, my trauma, and the daughter who cut us off when we needed her most. I include real letters from her so you can see how bitterness destroys a family. Attached were blurred images of my handwriting. The caption promised more inside. The letters were ones I had written at 16 and 19. Desperate, raw, filled with apologies I didn't owe and longing I had never received back. My lungs went tight. My vision tunneled. She was going to profit off my most vulnerable words, freeze them in print, sell them to strangers. And for the first time in my life, my immediate response wasn't to cry or beg her to stop or do nothing and call it peace. I opened a new browser tab and searched for a term I'd read 100 times but never applied to myself. Children's privacy rights when parents monetize their story. The search results were a revelation. Cases, articles, attorneys, terms like misappropriation and false light and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It turns out there was a word for adults who turned their children's lives into product without consent. Several words, actually, and one quiet, powerful truth: I wasn't powerless. She'd written a book. I was about to write a different kind of story. One with subpoenas, signed affidavits, and an ending she didn't control. I closed my laptop, heart still pounding, but not from fear, from focus. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving her narrative. I was preparing to end it. The studio lights felt hotter after I laid the legal packet on the table. For a moment, no one moved. The host blinked at the words cease and desist like she was trying to calculate whether they were good television. The band quieted. Somewhere backstage, a producer's voice crackled over a headset, too low to make out, but urgent enough that the stage manager shifted his weight. My mother recovered first. Of course she did. She gave a watery laugh and touched my arm with careful fingers. "Sweetheart," she said, her smile tightened at the edges, "you don't want to do this here. We can talk after the show. This is a misunderstanding." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at the camera, its red light burning steadily. "I sent this to your publisher last week," I said, voice even. "Certified mail. I emailed your agent. I gave everyone a chance to handle this privately." I turned to the host. "They scheduled this segment anyway." A ripple went through the audience. My mother's eyes flashed something sharp and furious before she smoothed it over with practiced woundedness. "You're angry," she said, her voice wobbling just enough. "I understand. Trauma." The word snapped something in me. "You put my breakdown in chapter 6, I said. "You described the night I tried to hurt myself as a dramatic cry for attention. You quoted my letter from the hospital. You didn't even change the date." The host shifted in her seat. This wasn't the reunion arc she'd been sold. "We use pseudonyms," my mother said quickly, turning to the camera. "I would never expose my children. The book is about my journey as a mother." "You used our real timelines," I cut in. "You kept enough details that anyone who knows us can connect the dots. You included excerpts of my writing. That's not your journey. That's mine." The host cleared her throat, sensing ratings and risk colliding. "Harper, we weren't aware of any legal dispute. Our producers were sent a copy of this too," I said, tapping the packet. I highlighted the section on unauthorized publication of private correspondence. That part wasn't just drama. It was true. I'd spent nights at my kitchen table with a lawyer from the nonprofit I worked for, drafting every line of that document. We attached screenshots, dates, links, archived pages of her blog, copies of my letters, the originals, not the edited versions she cherry-picked. The host's eyes flicked off stage. A producer made a frantic slicing motion across his throat. "Wrap it up." "We're going to cut to commercial," she said, smiling too brightly. "When we come back, maybe we can?" "No," I said calmly. "You invited me here as a prop in her redemption story. You framed this as a surprise reconciliation. I agreed to come because I wanted one thing on record." I turned fully to the nearest camera. "I did not consent to be in that book," I said. "I did not consent to have my mental health, my private letters, or my childhood turned into profit. If any of you have parents who think your pain belongs to their platform, know this. You are allowed to say no, and if no isn't enough, there are attorneys who will help you turn it into something courts understand." The studio went very still. My mother whispered, "How could you do this to me?" Tears finally spilling, mascara streaking in a way cameras loved. I looked at her and felt a strange calm. "You did it first," I said softly. "I'm just not letting you write my lines anymore." The red light on the camera flicked off as the show cut abruptly to commercial, but it was too late. The studio audience had phones. Clips were already uploading. And for the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the narrative. The network tried to bury it. They aired a heavily edited segment later that week, a sanitized version of the interview that cut my legal packet, my words about consent, even the way my mother's face drained when she realized I meant it. In their version, we hugged, sort of. They added soft music, overlaid a voiceover from the host about the complicated journey of healing. They ended on my mother holding up her book, the cover glinting under the lights. The problem was, the internet had already seen the uncut version. The grainy audience footage hit TikTok before I'd even boarded my flight home. By the time I landed, someone had synced my line, "This is the last time you'll use my story without my consent," to a trending audio. Teens lip-synced it while slamming journals shut. Adults stitched it with stories of parents who exposed them for likes. My name wasn't in the first batch of clips. People tagged it number daughter on TV, number not your content, number raising lies. But my mother's book title was visible in the background, and the internet is very good at math. By morning, my inbox was a war zone. Emails from my boss, pings from colleagues, voicemails from unknown numbers, texts from a burner number my brother used once to get around my blocks. One message stood out. A calm email from the legal department at my mother's publishing house. We'd like to schedule a conversation regarding the concerns raised in last night's broadcast. They didn't call it a violation. They didn't call it theft. They called it concerns. I forwarded it to our nonprofit's attorney with a note. It's starting. She called me within the hour. You handled yourself well on that stage, she said. Now we have to decide how far you want this to go. How far can it go? I asked. There was a pause, then the cool, steady recitation of options. Injunctions to halt distribution, damages for unauthorized use of my writing, demands for a recall of copies with my letters, claims of intentional infliction of emotional distress, depending on how ugly we wanted to make it. How ugly do you want to make it? She asked finally. I thought of my mother's face when the attorney read the liability clause in that other life I'd imagined for myself. But this wasn't that story. This wasn't about protecting finances. This was about protecting something harder to quantify. My voice. I want the book pulled, I said. I want my letters removed from any future edition. I want a public statement that I did not participate, did not give consent, and do not endorse her version of events. That's war, the attorney said quietly. She declared it years ago, I replied. I'm just finally showing up to the battlefield with armor. The meeting with the publisher happened over video, a row of faces in neat rectangles. The senior editor, the in-house counsel, a marketing manager who tried too hard to smile. We take these allegations very seriously, counsel began, slipping into the smooth cadence of someone who has said that phrase 100 times. Our understanding, based on Miss Hayes' representations, was that her children's stories were anonymized and that any letters were used with permission. She lied, I said. I have never spoken to your acquisitions team. I didn't even know the book was in production until the marketing started. The editor frowned faintly. We do have an email from someone with your name approving. She pulled up a PDF. The signature was clean, scanned, and very much not mine. The email address was my old school account, the one my mother had the password to for years. My stomach turned. I didn't write that, I said. I can prove it. I've had a new address for 3 years. Your timestamp shows approval from an account that was deactivated 12 months before. Counsel clicked something. Their eyes tightened. The marketing manager shifted uncomfortably. Liability calculations began behind their faces. What are you asking for specifically? Counsel said, all pretense dropping. I repeated my list. Pull the book. Remove my letters. Public statement. And if we refuse? She asked. I glanced at the camera, at my own reflection in the tiny square in the corner. Then, I use the same audience you marketed to, I said, and I tell them exactly how much you value the consent of the real people in your inspirational stories. Silence. In that silence, I realized something important. For the first time, my mother's ability to spin wasn't the most powerful force in the room. Paperwork was, receipts were. The truth, documented, signed, time-stamped. They excused themselves to discuss internally. The screen went dark except for my own reflection. 5 minutes later, they came back with careful faces. We are willing, counsel said, to negotiate terms. Negotiation is a polite word for the part where everyone pretends they're not threatening each other. The publisher moved fast once they realized how exposed they were. They agreed to halt promotion pending clarification. They offered to remove my letters in the paperback edition. They floated the idea of reframing my chapters as amalgams. I said no. We will not approve any edition, my attorney said firmly. That uses our client's experiences without explicit permission. That includes fabricated details that can be reasonably traced to her. Legal phrases worked like solvents. They dissolved all the soft padding around the issue. My mother was invited, then compelled to join the next call. She appeared on screen in a neutral sweater, hair pulled back, makeup lighter than her usual influencer face. For a second, I saw the woman she might have been if no one had ever handed her an audience. Then she opened her mouth. This is insane, she snapped, before anyone could launch into their prepared parcels of lawyer speak. You're going to destroy my career because my daughter is having a tantrum? Counsel smiled thinly. We're trying to prevent a lawsuit that could destroy all of us. Her gaze snapped to mine. You're really doing this, she said, voice low, to your own mother. After everything I sacrificed, you're siding with strangers. I thought of the donors who funded our nonprofit. The kids who wrote anonymous intake forms in shaky text. The clients who flinched when their own parents' names appeared on their caller IDs. They're less dangerous than you, I said softly. She recoiled as if I'd struck her. You're ungrateful, she hissed. I gave you life. I gave you a story worth telling. There's the problem, I replied. You think you gave it to me. It was never yours. The editor cleared her throat. We don't need to resolve the personal side here, she said carefully. We just need to know if Miss Hayes is willing to sign an addendum acknowledging that certain depictions were created without her daughter's consent and will be removed from future editions. Mom laughed. It was an ugly, brittle sound. Do you have any idea what that will do to my credibility, to my brand? If you refuse, counsel said coolly, you will likely face individual litigation from Miss Cole and breach of warranty claims from us. Your brand will be the least of your concerns. For once, my mother had no quick answer. Her face went slack. She looked older. I realized then that this wasn't just about a book. It was about the entire identity she'd built. This persona of the suffering warrior mother, the martyr who turned tragedy into content. If she admitted, even on page 213 in small print, that she'd crossed a line with me, the whole story started to wobble. Fine, she said finally, the word bitten off. Do your addendum, blame me, make me the villain, that's what she wants. I shook my head. What I want is for you to stop touching my life when you need a cliffhanger. The settlement terms took weeks to finalize. The first print run of Raising Lions was recalled due to permissions issues. The publisher buried the notice in a press release about their commitment to ethical storytelling. They offered full refunds. The revised edition, if it ever came out, would lose an entire arc. No estranged daughter, no letters from the brink, just a woman and her curated hardships. We negotiated a monetary settlement. I agreed to a non-disclosure about the amount, but not about the fact that it happened. I don't want hush money, I told my attorney. It's not hush money, she replied. It's a record that what she did had a cost. You can either let them keep that cost or make it fund something different. So I did. I set up a small grant under the nonprofit's umbrella. Legal assistance for kids exploited by family influencers and memoirists. A fund for people whose lives had been turned into someone else's product. My siblings reacted like the world had tilted. Eli called once, voice cautious. Mom says you ruined her, he said. Sponsors are dropping. Her tour got cut in half. I didn't ruin her, I said. I just turned on the lights. He was quiet a long time. June says, he trailed off. What? She says maybe you saved us, he admitted. Because she's been worried Mom was going to write a book about her next. Of all the vindications I'd imagined, that was not one of them. It was better. Because this was bigger than just me. This was about stopping the pattern before it swallowed the rest of us. The backlash came right on schedule. Some of my mother's followers flooded my old social media accounts, even the ones I barely used, with messages. How could you do this to the woman who raised you? You're proving her point about bitter daughters. She shared to help others. You're just trying to get attention. They didn't know I'd had attention forced on me like a spotlight I couldn't turn off. Others, though, found my work email through the nonprofit's website. I saw that clip. My mom runs a family vlog and records my panic attacks. My dad wrote an essay about my eating disorder for his newsletter. People at school recognized me. If you ever start something for people like us, I'll sign up. We hadn't meant the grant to become a movement. It started that way anyway. Journalists reached out. Not the kind my mother courted, the glossy magazines and feel-good morning shows, but investigative reporters, podcasters who examined digital ethics, lawyers who wrote op-eds about sharenting, and the legal vacuum around kids' consent. They asked if I'd go on record. I said yes under my own name on my own terms. No surprise segments, no reunion arcs. Just me in a small studio, mic in front of me, explaining the difference between sharing with your children and sharing at their expense. What would you say, one host asked, to parents who argue that it's their story too, that they're just telling their truth? I thought of my mother, of her kitchen speeches. Of the way she'd say, everything I do is for you, and then package our crises into content. I'd say this, I replied. Your truth shouldn't require exposing someone else's wounds without their consent. If the only way your story is powerful is by naming and displaying what your child went through, then you're not telling your story. You're hijacking theirs. The episode went modestly viral. not in the explosive, me-mubble way the talk show clip had. It moved quieter, slower, through forums and group chats and email newsletters, through the hands of therapists, teachers, even a few repentant parent bloggers who admitted, not publicly but to us, that they had gone too far. We created resources, templates kids could use to ask their parents to take content down, guidelines for ethical storytelling, a hotline where people could ask, "Do I have any rights here?" Sometimes the answer was, not yet. The law lagged behind technology by years. But sometimes, with the right jurisdiction and the right paper trail, we could say, yes, here's what we can do. My mother watched it all from the sidelines, her empire shrinking but not disappearing. She shifted her brand. Less about my difficult eldest daughter, more about cancel culture and betrayal. She framed herself as the victim of a smear campaign. Some people believed her, they always would, but others left, quietly one by one, unfollowing. At night, when the workday ended and the noise died down, I'd sit on my couch with my laptop closed and just breathe. I thought about the girl I'd been at 16, watching her mother blog about her breakdown like it was a plot twist. I thought about all the times I'd wondered if I was overreacting, if I was too sensitive, if maybe this was just what families did now. She hadn't been dramatic. She'd been right. One evening, a draft bill landed in my inbox from a state representative's office. It proposed baseline protections for children featured in monetized content, revenue sharing, consent thresholds, removal rights at 18. "We've been following your advocacy," the aide wrote. "We thought you might want to consult. It was just a draft. It might die in committee or be gutted by lobbyists or rewritten beyond recognition. But it existed. And that meant kids like me might one day have something I never did when my mother started hitting upload. Leverage. Not just emotional, legal, structural. The kind that didn't depend on whether a parent decided to be kind that day. The kind that said simply, you are not content, you are a person. A year after the talk show, I found myself on another stage. No cameras this time, just a lecture hall at a state university that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old carpet. The event flyer billed it as, "Whose story is it? Consent, family, and digital narratives." There were maybe 70 people in the audience, students, a few parents, therapists, one or two reporters who preferred fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs to network gloss. I stood behind the podium, palms flat against the wood, and told a version of my story that belonged entirely to me. I talked about the chipped tooth photo, the blog posts, the lives narrated in real time by people who didn't have to live with the comments, the book, the lawsuit, the settlement that became a seed instead of a muzzle. I watched faces change when I said, "Your privacy isn't a gift your parents give you. It's a right they're supposed to protect." During Q&A, a student with purple hair and shaking hands asked, "What if they won't stop? What if talking to them doesn't work?" I thought of my talk show moment, of the cease and desist, of how terrifying it had been and how necessary. "Then you build a paper trail," I said gently. "You document. You look for allies, teachers, counselors, organizations. You remember that no is still valid even when someone ignores it. And if you can, you get help turning that no into something with legal weight." Afterward, people lined up to talk. Some just said thank you and left quickly, as if staying too long might expose them. Others lingered, telling snippets of their own lives in rushed fragments. "My mom has 500,000 followers. My dad posted my coming out before I told my friends. They say I should be grateful. I feel stolen." Their stories burned, familiar and foreign all at once. I didn't offer easy answers. I couldn't, but I could offer names of lawyers, templates, a card with our nonprofit's site. On my way out, I noticed her, back row. Near the aisle, a woman in a simple coat, hair pulled into a low knot, no ring light glow. Her face was partially shadowed, but I knew the line of her jaw like a map I'd been trying to stop following for years. My mother. She stayed seated as others left, staring at the empty stage. For a moment, an old reflex tugged at me, the urge to go to her, to demand explanation, to crave some impossible combination of apology and understanding that would retrofit my childhood into something less warped. I stood there halfway up the aisle, heart beating too loud. She looked up, met my eyes, no cameras, no microphones, no host to narrate, just us. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I didn't," she started, then stopped. Whatever story she usually reached for wasn't working. I didn't think this would get so big. The words were small, wrong, still centered on impact to her, not to me. Once that would have gutted me. Now it just clarified things. I know, I said. We stood in a silence that held everything she'd done and everything I'd survived. Behind her, someone had left a flyer on the seat. You are not content. You are a person. Her gaze flicked to it, then back to me. Do you hate me? She asked. The same question, different place. I thought about it. Hate required a kind of constant connection I no longer wanted. No, I said. I just don't owe you access to the parts of me you haven't earned. Her face crumpled slightly. I lost you, she whispered. For a moment, grief swept through me, not for the mother I had, but for the one she could have been if someone had told her early enough that love isn't measured in likes. You never had me, I answered quietly. You had a character you wrote, I'm just no longer playing her. I stepped past her then, down the aisle, toward the exit. She didn't follow. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting my lungs. I stood on the steps and watched students scatter across the quad, their faces lit by phone screens, their lives quietly recorded in feeds they might not fully control. My phone buzzed, an email notification. Subject, draft passed committee. Body, the child content bill is moving forward. We're naming one clause Harper's provision, if you're okay with that. It protects private correspondence from being used commercially without consent. I laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound that turned into breath in the cold air. Harper's provision. My name not as a cautionary tale on someone else's page, but as part of a safeguard that might keep another kid's letters out of a stranger's hands. I typed back, I'm okay with that. As I walked away from the building, the lecture hall lights dimmed behind me. Somewhere inside, my mother sat alone in the half-dark, surrounded by chairs that no longer needed to witness our story. I didn't know if she'd change. I didn't build my future on the possibility. I built it on something else. The quiet, solid knowledge that my life was no longer raw material for anyone's brand, that my pain wasn't a resource to be mined, that my voice could create protections, not just echo in a void. For the first time, the ending didn't feel like a door slamming. It felt like a page turning, not the last one, just one I got to write myself.